everyone, and I have the great pleasure of talking to you about how to unleash your mind. Unfortunately, I'm doing it at the tail end of the day, probably just when you want to put your mind back on the leash and walk it home. But I'll try to do my best to make my words be very meaningful to your life and to add value to your everyday life. The very first thing you need to know about unleashing your mind is that it's a lot like sex and sleep. And who doesn't like sex and sleep? Sometimes together. Unleashing your mind is like sex and sleep in that you can't will either of them. You can't will them to occur. You have to allow them to occur. The more you pursue them, the more they elude you, the more frustrated you get. The unfortunate thing is, though, that you're entrepreneurs and you're used to pursuing things. So it's a slightly different mindset from what you usually do. And the more you chase sleep, the more you pursue orgasm, the more you pursue unleashing your mind, the worse you're going to feel, and you'll get very frustrated. Nevertheless, it's possible to do. And you absolutely need to do it in order to be able to respond well and creatively to the ever-changing demands of business needs, business life, in the very dynamic world that we all now inhabit. So let me get on with the information, and I will outline 9 steps to unleashing your mind. And the first one is that you've got to clear away all the accumulated debris in your head on a pretty regular basis. Think of your mind as a Ferrari parked in your head. No one has to persuade you that your bright, shiny object needs upkeep. It needs polish, it needs the right fuel, it needs to be driven with respect. You have to use it right. And why should your mind require any less? Because it's going to do a hell of a lot more than a Ferrari. So to access the Ferrari parked in your head, clean the debris out of your garage. And so what do I mean by the debris? So in the course of everyday life, we get dinged, we get slighted, disappointed, frustrated, distracted. And most people don't attend to the accumulated slights. Life gets pretty busy, but you really can't let the wounds fester. You have to stop and address them and redress them. Acknowledge the little dings that you get to your sense of self. Because if you try to push them away, if you try to suppress them, they're really going to come back and bite you in the butt. They're going to undermine you. They're going to undermine your performance. They're going to subterraneously sap your energy. You're just going to feel bad. And you won't know why, because you really have to acknowledge the dings. So if you feel bad, just sit down for a minute and search for the source of whatever is bothering you, the source of your misery. Name it. That's half the battle. And once you know what the problem is, I'm confident that you'll figure out a solution. So the best approach to healing wounds isn't focused on fixing yourself and fixing things that happened in the past. It's really acquiring the skills to navigate difficulty much more effectively. So you'll spend less time with your brain and body existing in a state of stress physiology, which only makes you anxious and defensive. So healing all these little open wounds will put your body and brain in a position to be unleashed. Now, how do you unleash it? Once you clear out the accumulated debris, you've got to work a bit on regularly maintaining your mental health. So first, to do that, you got to feed your brain right, so you have the right fuel for that Ferrari. And then, too often people think of mental health as a place you arrive at or something you have. I have my mental health, but it's actually not a destination, and it's not a possession. It's something you really have to do. It's a practice, and the practice of, think of it as mind management. So like that Ferrari, your mind can churn with energy and take you interesting places. But it can also veer off course too. And like with the Ferrari, sometimes to devastating effects. So you want to engage in good driving, and good driving is, think of driving, think of being on the highway, and it's a process of constant adaptation and quick and sensitive responsivity, requiring a whole bunch of specific skills: how to take a turn, how to merge into traffic, how do you change lanes safely. So sound mental health is also a process of constant adaptation, and except it's characterized by psychological flexibility. And that's the ability to recognize and adjust your mindset and your behavior to various situations as they arrive, so that you don't callously hurt yourself or damage others, and so that you can continue to represent your values and pursue your worthy goals, despite distractions and obstacles. So, like driving, the process of mental health involves a very specific set of skills that let you manage well the products of your mind. And the products of your mind are thoughts, emotions, and behavior. Those are the three big ones. So how do you do this? The first thing you need to do is you need to think accurately. I can tell you more about that later, but I want to get on to the elements of managing your mental health. Think accurately. With regard to your emotions, don't deny them. Don't be obedient to them. Don't feel you have to obey them. They have information, but they're not the whole truth. Accept them. Accept your emotions. Maintaining your mental health also requires you to tolerate short-term pain to avert long-term suffering. So we've outlined two elements: clearing out the debris, maintaining mental health. Number three in unleashing your mind And maybe the most important of all is you've got to clearly define a goal. You've got to have some place to go. Your head has to be focused on someplace ahead. Your goal can change as you go, but you have to have a goal, and it works as a kind of magic mental elixir. It removes, what is it? So what does it do as an elixir? It removes all the friction that everyday experience generates, all those little dings and slights and hurts, and it exerts a force that pulls you forward. And in keeping with that, you have to move forward toward your goal. That's number 4. It doesn't matter how small the progress is that you make, you just have to make progress. And there just needs to be forward movement. If you have a goal and you're moving toward it, the negativity of the crap that occurs in the course of everyday experience actually gets diminished. You don't feel pain acutely. Your attention doesn't get hijacked by trivia. So I'm going to share with you a little bit of neuroscience that I think every entrepreneur should know. This is a bit of a simplification, but it's important to know that emotions, moods, thoughts, mindsets, they all take shape in a neural circuit that involves a few key brain structures. The structures usually vary, but 2 of the most important are the amygdala, which flags threatening experience and sets off the stress response, and the prefrontal cortex, the executive control center, the thinking part of the brain. These are really 2 major players in the circuitry of mental life. And the prefrontal cortex is the area just behind your forehead. So the brain, in its most friction-free, free-flowing state, occurs as you approach a desired goal. It's kind of the emotion that you might think of as eagerness. So what happens in eagerness, in this highly positive state, is that the positive side of the prefrontal cortex doesn't just activate positive feelings and spur motivation, it actually suppresses the negative side of the prefrontal cortex. And it inhibits the negative states that get in the way of focusing on positive goals. And it does this by suppressing the amygdala. And most of us differ in the degree to which the positive and negative sides of our prefrontal cortex are in balance and get activated in the course of the day. And that difference probably accounts for people's difference in vulnerability to depression, likely accounts for differences in personality, how extroverted people are. But perhaps even more, it underlies differences in what makes people most human, and that is their capacity to adapt to the ever-changing demands of life. Which brings us to the next point, which is that you have to be open to new ways of doing things. And in service of that, number 6, you need to adopt an experimental mindset. So what do I mean by that? there's really no way, and you've probably experienced this many times, just in the course of everyday life. You There's no way to really know what action you take, what strategy you choose. There's no way of knowing in advance whether it's going to work or how well it's going to work. So you can't be rigidly married to only one way of doing things. You've got to be able to try out an approach, assess the results, analyze the results, and and that's what the experimental mindset is. Um, and it allows you to deploy your curiosity, because you and to be creative and to think of new ways of doing things, and explore what's working, what's not working, and to learn from your failures. Um, and and when you work in an experimental mindset, failures aren't really failures. They are simply opportunities to learn more. Um, Number 7. Okay, I lied a little bit to you before. I told you that having clearly defined goals was probably the most important um, uh, facet of unleashing your mind, but it isn't the only thing that's bigly important. Number 7 is important too, and that's finding ways to quiet anxiety in the face of uncertainty. If you're deploying your experimental mindset, you're going to be constantly trying out new ways of doing things. You're not going to know which and whether anything works until you analyze the results. So there's going to be a lot of uncertainty. And there's a lot of uncertainty in the dynamism of everyday life now, anyway. You simply cannot function well. You really can't unleash your mind unless you have an array of strategies to quiet the anxiety. You need to know that anxiety is mostly noise. It's a stimulus to pay attention to something. It doesn't need to be obeyed in itself, because it really is mostly noise, not signal. Um, and it's absolutely critical to find ways to quiet it down. Otherwise, what happens when you're anxious? You wind up questioning yourself. You wind up questioning the things that you're doing. You wind up second guessing yourself. You get thrown off track. Can't afford that. Um, I would say that what works for me to quiet my anxiety may not work for you and may not work for the next guy. But you kind of have to select from a buffet of things. Things and different things may work at different times. So things that commonly work to quiet anxiety, meditation is one of them. I'm not a meditator. I've tried it. I meditate in a different kind of a way at different times. I have a meditation zone that I like to get into, but I don't use it as a general tool to quiet my anxiety. What I really like to do to quiet my anxiety is deep breathing, because it really works very quickly. I used to be a runner. That used to be my really favorite way of calming anxiety until it killed my knees. But yoga could be sex. Choose your weapon. There are just a lot of things out there, and it doesn't have to be anybody else's way of quieting anxiety. It could be thinking of some beautiful place that holds some beautiful memories for you. There's just absolutely no limit on what you can choose to be that thing that quiets you. Um, So you're in the experimental mindset, you've got goals, you're moving toward them, you don't know what's going to work, you do want to make progress. So what you need to do is, in the service of unleashing your mind, is summing up your progress every week and assess what's working and what's not. I hope you're doing that now. I hope this isn't coming as news to you. Um, so give yourself a list of short-term goals and a to-do list of short-term goals and long-term goals, and note every ounce of progress. I don't care how small it is. I don't care how big it is. Just note it. There are times when you're going to need that. And I would say number 9, in terms of unleashing your mind, is, and this might come as a surprise to you, but it's to be kind. Kindness opens you up. Meanness closes you down, and it puts you on the defensive. And once you're on the defensive, you're fighting to maintain what you have. And that's exactly the opposite of unleashing your mind. And those are my 9 steps to unleashing your mind, starting with clearing out the debris, maintaining your mental health, defining a goal, moving toward your goal, open to new ways of doing things, adopt an experimental mindset, find ways to quiet your anxiety in the face of uncertainty, sum up your progress, and then you put yourself in a position to let your mind roam free and be unleashed. And it's aided and abetted by being kind, because that is also a process of opening up. And that's what you need to do. I could tell you more about how to maintain your mental health. And we can go into some specifics of that. And one of the things I did mention about that was to pay some attention to your emotions, accept your emotions. You don't deny them, you don't suppress them, you don't obey them, you just accept them. And this is a really important thing, because a lot of people are under the impression that they're not emotional, and yet they've accumulated slights and dings over the course of time, and they're working underneath to constrict your feelings. You might be trying to suppress some resentment, some negative feelings you have. These are all sapping energy underground. So it's really important to pay attention to emotions. It doesn't make you emotional, but it's important to pay attention to emotions, because without your knowledge or consent, they're going to eat away at your energy, and you're not going to have the energy if you ever get to the point where you can unleash your mind. So think of emotions like thoughts as mind events, not world events. And what that means is that you have a lot of say in regulating them, maybe more say than you think you might have. Most people, I would say, have the impulse to deny emotions, particularly the negative emotions like pain and distress, discomfort. unhappiness, resentment, shame, all of those negative emotions, it's pretty common to want to deny them. And it's okay to choose not to engage with an emotion at any one point in time. And that becomes a pretty healthy coping mechanism. But that's done with awareness. You are choosing not to engage with an emotion at a particular time. What denial is something a bit different. It's sort of an unwillingness to feel, and it's very ineffective, because what it does is it makes you really sort of underground. It makes you hyper vigilant about the emotion that you're trying to ban from your life, and it consumes all that underground energy. So the first step in regulating emotional data is just acceptance, like the weather. And once you acknowledge that it's raining, it's still up to you to decide how you want to act, knowing that fact. Emotions are really good consultants, but they're terrible executives. You don't want them to take charge. They should work for you, not you for them. And what you do is you take the emotional information as one source of data, and the other sources of data that you have are your goals, your values, your experience, Google, logic, knowledge of yourself, knowledge of the world. And that gives you a way to handle your emotions.